All right, should we get started or should we wait a couple more minutes, Alden?
I think we get started.
Let's hit it. Welcome everybody to the Design for America Spark series. My name is Danielle Clark. I oversee business development for Edelman, which is the world's largest family-owned communications firm. I'm based in San Francisco, and this is my lovely kitchen and some bikes I do not ride. Just a couple of housekeeping points that we've said throughout, but just want to remind everyone, we will be, sorry, if everyone can keep their audio off, that would be rad. Be sure to type in your questions into the chat, but please, everyone, if you can, if you have enough bandwidth, I saw Northern Wisconsin perhaps does not have bandwidth, but if you have bandwidth, please put your face on video. It's okay, we're all friends and family here, and we want to see where you're all sitting today. Amazing, thank you, I see everyone popping up. We will also be recording this and posting it on the DFA YouTube page probably later this week. Alden will be taking care of that. But I'm so pleased to be here as your host and moderator. And my partner in crime today will be Rich Hollant. Rich is the founder and director of Collab, based in Hartford, Connecticut. And the theme for today will be, it's always personal, leadership, equity, and closing the gap. Rich, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Let me try and figure out my share now, because there's so many faces, I can't find my buttons. There you go. And share, and this. Voila. So we're going to talk today about a bunch of things, and it's going to go really fast, but the fun part about this is I'm going to try and keep the talking to a screen to a minimum, just so that you can get enough context. And then we're going to turn this into a conversation, which I find a heck of a lot more interesting. And I definitely get more out of it. So what I will most likely forget to mention, so I'm going to say it right out front, Collab right now is a design, branding, communications firm that works entirely on social value work, on work in communities, on work that's anti-racist by nature, and that's pro lifting up folks in the service of underserved communities. So, pretty much everything here is in my opinion, but also in my experience thus far. I'm going to share with you a journey of how this organization transformed and how it continues to transform, and how we're figuring out how to be useful. Be on that screen, gotcha. So, the first thing that I think that I really want to make a point about is that everything is personal. Absolutely everything is personal. There's this idea that we could detach ourselves from and look at things abstractly, but we can't. Access is personal. Absolutely everything that we experience in this life, it goes through this lens of who we are. And to me, one of the first great rules of design is counter to what folks have been saying for the past 30, 40 years about removing yourself from the equation. I think that design, for me, is about inserting ourselves into it as much as possible. Also, though, everything's under the influence of a dominant system. There is no doubt about that either, that those two things are coexisting and very, very often in conflict. And I'm going to share some of the influences and the conflicts that have existed. I was born in 1963. That's me, in Haiti, at a time when there was a lot of hope for the relief of oppression on that island because of this new American president, and the idea that that he was going to change a whole lot. In that one individual can make a difference for the oppression of multitudes. And I was born 2 weeks before he was assassinated. and all of the hopes and all of the ideologies that that this island had about the singular savior went to the wayside. And we had to reorganize and find another way as a people to figure out where hope lies. Now that was 1963. It took me 30 years, and I came to this country when I was 3 years old. So it took me 30 years, an entire education before I actually really started to learn about the civil rights and the fight for justice and the fight for racial equality in our country. I learned it by designing a book posthumously for Ernest Withers. Ernest, in doing that book and reading up on Ernest and looking at his images, there was a prevailing truth that still endures with me today. He insisted that he is not a photographer, even though he's captured some of the most stunning images during the civil rights movement. He insisted that his job was to be a propagandist, that he distributed propaganda, and that his art was intentionally not being left for interpretation, but was to be guided to a specific outcome. And I carry that with me quite a bit as well. I think it's always important, by the way, to share with folks from where you speak. And what I'm sharing with you right now is from where I speak. In 2008, met William Drentel down at Yale, and we had a great conversation, and the most profound insight that I got from him is about live prototyping. That what happens when design stops being precious and starts being real and starts being in the moment and starts evolving through the instantaneous feedback. How can we dare to both immerse our ego and try to remove our ego in a way that we can witness the experience of what we considered ours, and to forego that and to have the ours, our own, become our shared, redefined how design moves for me. And then soon after that, while Bill changed for me how I saw design, I met Richard Wilson, who is the director of the Human Rights Institute, and he changed for me what it means to be human. At the time, the Human Rights Institute was running this Siri data, which essentially was collecting 60-something data points around human rights violations and issues across something to the effect of 170 countries that were participating and willing to be evaluated in this way. This data informed the World Bank, and it informed lots of folks who assessed, lots of big organizations who assessed risks and investments, and who created a global picture of the state of human rights violations around the world, and rank them, and you can actually see and chart them over 30 years, to get a really clear picture of the state of human rights issues around the country, around the world. Richard drew this diagram for me on my whiteboard in my office. If 0 implies, oh look, I forgot that my cursor works here. Ha ha ha. If 0 implies absolutely no human rights violations, I mean, this is the cleanest country in the world, right? Better than Sweden. And 1 is like, kind of average, and 2 is pretty bad. And this is time, obviously. He then drew these 2 lines for me. 1 was a really sharp incline that went from the impossible 0 skyrocketing towards 2, you know, at a really steep incline, you know, threatening to actually break beyond 2. Drew another line for the sake of this diagram, so we could see it clearer. I put it up at the 2 point, you know, but it could be anywhere in here, but it's just a steady line, you know, nothing, you know, chaotic, you know, it's not shaking the roof in any way. And the question that he had to me is, which one am I most concerned about? And my math brain kicked in, and I thought that the one that had the largest delta of change, so this big spiking line, is the one that's creating the most anxiety for me. What Richard pointed out is that really the concerning line is this long horizontal. Wherever it is on that continuum, it implies conditions that have gone across generations. And the more generations we cross, the more we as humans lose the muscle memory to conditions prior to what we're living under, right? So this big spike is if something just started happening right now that we'd never seen before in our country, folks would be out in the street, would be rioting, it'd be just like madness, you know, because we'd feel the instability of it and we'd respond to bring it back to stability. But here, you could hang out in a state of absolute oppression for so long without having any cognition whatsoever that you're in that place. This diagram for me became about urgency. And it's about the need to address immediately. At the time, Collab was working on big corporate projects, you know, big, fun, crazy corporate projects who were flying all over the world and you know, just doing bananas things, you know, building robots to sell cell phones. And I went home after this conversation and went back into the office on Monday and told everybody to wrap up whatever corporate projects that they were working on, that we were on a new mission to address this urgency, to disrupt this lack of muscle memory, and to bring all of what we knew and what we had experienced in our lives that were fairly privileged to address folks that have had a boot on their neck for just way too long. And so that day, Collab became this whole other animal, trying to figure out impact. We live, work, or die for impact, and we mean that with all our beings. And that impact is social. Oops. And by impact, we mean specifically access, just, equitable access. We had no idea what we were doing at the time. We just sort of dove into the deep end on this thing and had to sort of figure it out. The folks who worked for me and, you know, we all relied on a history that we had together of understanding each other and from where we all spoke and respecting that tremendously. And we started figuring things out together. One of the things that that I've always known and that I've taken quite seriously is this idea of by whatever means necessary. I'm nonviolent, so I didn't quite mean it exactly the way Malcolm meant it. But I did mean that by whatever means necessary is that in the pursuit of removing barriers to access that are in front of so many people, we're not going to accept the limitations of what we may or may not know or what we may or may not be able to do. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to get it done. To us, design is simply intention put to action to create impact. That's all design has ever been to us, and that's what we're doubling down in. And again, impact is equitable, inclusive access. is how we define it. And so in one way, we're talking about, potable water, that we all should be able to have fresh, clean water, right? That's a piece of access that we all should be able to have, basic human needs. And on the other end of it, this photograph sits over my desk, and as a reminder of that, to this day, we're still fighting for that. That so many people, whether it be about gender or sexuality or race, are fighting for the right and the freedom to be who they are, and to feel safe and secure in presenting their whole selves and speaking always from where they speak. And that's a form of access as well. So what we decided right away is that we're going to bring all of our abilities to the worthy places where we've been summoned. All of our abilities. It does not mean, we're going to design posters and, we don't have a vision of what the outcome of our deliverable will be. What we have a vision for is showing up. And if showing up means that, that we're moving boxes around for somebody, if showing up means that we're delivering meals, if showing up means that we're packing backpacks, then that's what we're doing, because that's what the community is calling us to do and where we're being called to help. So we are saying absolute yes all the time to everything. Absolute yes. And there's a great conundrum that I realized about saying yes, not conundrum, a really interesting juxtaposition that happens with saying yes. We think that the more we say yes, the more we're going to get stuff dumped on us, right? That, oh my God, there's so much that needs to be done. It's all going to come funneling right through us, and we're just going to die on the vine, not being able to catch our breath. But what we found is that the more you say yes, and the more that you show up with intentionality, and the more that you are in community, the community learns what it is that you do particularly best. They understand you. They want to the community wants to put you to the best use and the most efficient use, right? And they will start selecting what to put you on. And over time, that picking up boxes start migrating to the things that you do particularly well. So it never has gotten overwhelming. Some of the outcomes for us for that, right? By saying yes, we've had the opportunity to, and this video is not going to work well. We've had the opportunity to show up in some really interesting places. We had the opportunity to contribute to this action that was happening in Hartford, where let me try to make this thing work because that's going to drive me nuts. To an action that was happening in Hartford, where folks were living in HUD-subsidized slumlord housing, and the degree of mold and rodent feces that were in these places were creating states of asthma in all the kids who are living in these thousands of apartments. And kids would wake up in the morning. The stories that I was hearing is about kids wake up in the morning and with rodent bites on their legs, and there was no way of stopping that. And what we ended up doing is participating in getting the message clear and visible, not designing beautiful posters per se, but making sure that the message resonated where it needed to resonate, and that the folks who had compelling stories were pushed forward as leaders in the community. This young guy, unfortunately, this video is not working particularly well, he went head on with the mayor, and on a number of occasions, a number of public occasions, backed by clergy, backed by, by the entire infrastructure of his community with a compelling story. And, we took down HUD. Their contracts were canceled. They were fined tremendously. Their properties were confiscated and given to folks who are running them better. And entire organizational movement was started in the north end of Hartford that's active and vigilant and strong, like everything that I'd heard of in the 60s, you know, and we got to be a part of that by showing up. By showing up, I got to be a part of affecting local legislation here. Some pay equity acts. This is me, you know, pushing the governor out of her way so that I could talk about the bill that we just signed. And that's the then governor, hanging out over here, Dan Malloy. So we had the opportunity to facilitate conversations that brought people together, to design better policies around pay equity, around, let's see, there was pay equity, there was family medical leave acts, you know, all these things that primarily impact women and Black women specifically around here. And we also very recently got the news that some of the writing that we've done and some of the communications that we've been putting out helped influence some key votes here that recently got racism in Connecticut categorized as a health concern, as a public health concern. And that, to us, the ability to get in and use design, use what we know about empathy and facilitation and problem solving and simplifying and communicating to bring disparate audiences together with a common point of view, is what we're bringing. And none of this had to do with posters or logos, you know, which was kind of exciting. You know, and it's great to see legislation actually happen, because that's where we start tackling the system where, you know, where it can actually do some good. We took all of what we've learned about organizing, that we've learned through being in community, and I got brought down to Virginia, and we used the skills that we'd learned about organizing to go into these 14 African-American, historically targeted African-American communities, and to help build a context for generating funding for an African-American cultural center that was being built in Virginia. Now, the interesting thing is we were being called in to do a piece of public art, which you're seeing here. It featured portraits and statements, and, you know, in this round that we built with benches where folks could sit and reflect, right? But to be able to do that, we had to go in and organize and put a layer of community organizing in these 14 neighborhoods that had been historically disparate, you know, and were not connected in any way, shape, or form, right? And so through the process of doing these, neighbors were talking to each other, you know, and so they were learning about the benefits and the privileges that some folks had and what other folks didn't have, right? And so at the beginning of these interviews, so we collected a bunch of interviews, shot some videos, and shot some portraits. At the beginning of these 100 or so interviews that we conducted, folks were talking an awful lot about the gratitude that they felt for what they were given, you know, that their fathers and grandfathers would go down to the ocean and collect shells and bring them back and smash them themselves to build their roads out of shells. And they were grateful for the ability to do that, right? Towards the end of the interviews, you know, the tone shifted so dramatically, right? It became like, do you believe that my father had to go down and get these shells and make our roads ourselves? And that there became a point of not accepting that straight line horizontal that had existed for so long, you know, that it was, that this simple design art project was an ability to embed some disruption into the status quo of these communities, and and help these folks through recognizing their collective power, be able to kind of rise up and express that power to their government and to the folks that kept them isolated for decades. And that system lives on there now still. I'm gonna skip this. This is I'm the commissioner on cultural affairs right now. Where this has led me is I'm working with the mayor's office to open the city. I'm heading up the team that's opening art, culture, recreation, and faith-based organizations. So the places where people congregate in big groups. And my whole goal is to recognize the inequities that have gone on throughout this pandemic, and to assure that in the spaces that we occupy, that we're influencing, that we level those playing fields, and we do something about the overt racism that's taking place right now and around this pandemic. Just as a point of data to share why I think that this is important work for us to be doing. We are seeing right now the arts and culture sector shrinking by 40%. So by 60% rather. So that 60% of the people who are employed in the arts and culture sector are no longer employed there, and there is no vision over the next 12 to 18 months of bringing these people back. That there's actually a high possibility that it'll shrink even more, right? Arts and culture is where in almost all parts of the system where the fight for equity is most delegated, right? It's delegated to the place where it is entirely and purely personal, or it could be delegated as personal, and not in places where it could be seen as systemic, right? So this is why I'm imploring everybody to take these things that are like so deeply personal and bring them to the system, bring the whole of it to the system, don't let the personal be sequestered, be sequestered or closeted or hidden away. Bring it out, bring it forward, because there's a lot of organization that's existing around, around our ability to connect on a personal level and, with empathy and care, and dare to be in a government meeting or a board meeting and use words like love, and that changes it. And it's a subtle disruption, but boy, it turns the whole thing upside down. So we're also now heading up Hartford Fashion Week. This was at one point when we took it over, it was purely an event-based operation. We've flipped the switch on that, and it's largely an equity operation. It's looking at jobs, it's looking at creative infrastructure, and it's looking at building associations, organizing, and in soft unionizing folks who are working in the creative field. And we're using a point of entry that's been kind of comfortable for folks, right? It's about part of fashion, and it's and it's so consumer and so retail, but really the understructure of this has the possibility of being truly disruptive. And we're taking it there, and we're using it as a model for other disruptions that could take place. Nearing the end, I think. And I'm going to talk to you now about my baby, I think. Yeah. So about a year ago, I went to a meeting in this building. It's the Goodwin branch of the Hartford Public Library in one of the most underserved and forgotten corners of the city. They had just spent about $4 or $5 million 3 or 4 years ago on the building. What you can't see is on the roof here, there's a field of solar panels. I mean, this place was totally tricked out. They had just installed the solar panels, and then they realized that, that they were going to cut funding to this library. They had already cut funding for the community center, so it didn't exist anymore. By pulling out the library, all of the resources were gone from that corner of the city. And in fact, those solar panels that I mentioned that are on the roof there, they were installed, but they were never plugged in because when they cut the budget, they just stopped spending everything, right? So this building had been sitting vacant for about a year and a half. And the library thought to call a bunch of folks together and talk about, how they might reimagine this building. The most prevailing concept that came out of this was to create an opioid clinic. And I have to tell you, though that's incredibly necessary, it broke my heart to think about taking what was a sign of hope and opportunity and possibility, the way that folks could actually do something, go and get the support to close that gap, and the opportunities gap, the equity gaps, and turn it into a symbol of, of where the greatest pain of the community is. It shook something for me, something fundamental. It shook this sense of how the system really doesn't understand the community. It doesn't get down close enough to really see the possibility and to see the vibrancy that's truly there in all people. The library put out an RFP that nobody responded to. About like, oh, what would you do with this building? Not a single person responded to it. And the library director gave me a phone call and was like, hey, you understand this stuff. Tell me, why did nobody respond to this RFP? I was like, well, because everybody's at capacity, and everybody's working on so many things. And this is a big project, and it's a big project that you are asking someone to bail you out of, essentially, and you had no skin in the game whatsoever. And so if you really want to do this, instead of doing this burdensome RFP process, pick a partner, show up as a partner and say like, hey, let's do something here together. They gave me a phone call about 2 weeks later and said, hey, so I want to pick you guys as a partner. Let's figure out what we could do here. And we created this center. It's a big building. Our office occupies about 1/3 of the space, if that, maybe a quarter of the space. It's got, big, huge conference room that seats 120 people, theater style. It's got other breakout rooms. It's got a full kitchen. It's got an acre of property in the middle of the city. I mean, you could put on an entire theatrical production in this place, right? The overhead that Collab was spending for where our office was prior is what it costs us to operate this building, with 5 times as much space. And we're now able to operate a community center there called Free Center, where that space, all of it, except for that little footage where our computers are, we share with the community. It's open for events. It's open for free for folks to use and to hold workshops. I mean, we're hosting defund the police workshops there, partially subsidized by the government now, we're doing community organizing, arts events, gallery exhibitions. It's all these access points that the community didn't have, that we can now support, and make sure they have. This model has been going on for a year, and it's been working pretty well. We're opening our second free center in another town outside of Hartford called Middletown. That one's centering the same idea around access and making a lot of access to the community-driven opportunities, and that there's a wellness component that's built into it as well. So we want to normalize mental health by putting caseworkers in a space where beautiful art and provocative art hangs on walls, and dance activities are taking place, that they're walking through to get to their service appointments. And initially in Free Center, we were, the first phase of the model was about simply providing space. Now we're, within a year, we're getting lots of grants to run programs. For example, Free Center's building a huge communications network now that we're not available to use, now that the space isn't available to be used, to keep everybody connected in the arts and culture in equity space in the city. We're building a platform where we could all work virtually. We're building a system called Culture Vision, which is a series of free, full access sites like Zoom and really good event presentation that's schedulable and available for free to anybody in the community, and particularly for organizations that could use that to monetize and to be able to stay afloat and not cave and not submit to this 60% shrinkage in the arts and culture space. And we're able to partner with some organizations out of Harlem to employ folks, to pay them to learn to make podcasts. So we're doing teaching around the writing and around the actual mechanics of recording. And I've got 5 folks there. We've got 9 folks in the program right now. And when that cohort leaves, we'll bring another 9 in, and we're just going to keep doing that so that folks could get their story out the way they tell their story, not filtered through somebody else's lens, and get the confidence to show up and be their full selves, present and personal. And again, I can't say it enough, we do anti-racism work. We're constantly lifting up people who have tremendous positive impact on our community around equity and anti-racism, and we're getting funding to push them forward to help their messages be amplified. And I think that ultimately what it comes down to for me is that the more personal we get, the more of our passion we bring to it, the less we care about what we do and care more about that we do towards impact, the more we can genuinely say that we are the power. Every last one of us here on this call, we are the power, that, that there's this myth that the system hogs it all and it hides it, but ultimately it does so by isolating us and by holding up the smear of what we can't do. But gosh, we can do it. We can affect the change and get busy, get going. That's it for me. Love to chat. There's all the contact stuff. You know what? So that I could get out of the screen so I could see your faces again, I'm going to just throw all that stuff in chat.
Right on. And while you do that, I'm going to start asking some questions. We have some that have come through the chat. We have questions hitting on a few different topics: balancing urgency with stamina, dynamics of power, and just sustainable partnerships to kick off. So why don't we go with the first question? We are in a period of immense urgency of disrupting this muscle memory we have lost. but I think a lot about how the continued state of urgency creates burnout and the fear of spreading ourselves too thin. Do you have any advice about balancing urgency and care?
Well, I'm the worst person in the world to ask that. To be honest with you, it's family, you know, and they make me stop. You know, when I don't stop, they will make me stop. So yeah, there's urgency, right? But we're working on it. The issue with urgency is not about whether you're taking a moment to catch your breath. The issue was about the apathy that created the urgency, right? I think that the best metaphor that I have for this is the body on the ground metaphor. If I'm sitting here right now, and there's someone that's fallen down 6 blocks away, I may not know that, right? And I might not necessarily actually even be driving around looking for the people who've fallen down. You know, there's enough of that comes to me, right? That's right there in front of us. The concern for me, right, is when I walk out my door and there's someone that's fallen down there, and I have so many other things going on that I step over and keep going, right? You know, that's the pattern that we need to break, because there's a tremendous amount of stepping over and keeping going and thinking that we could get to it tomorrow, and that tomorrow becomes the next day, and that the next day becomes the next day, right? If we take a look at self-care as a necessary part of doing the work, right? Then we go back to doing the work when our energy's there, right? If we take, but it's a correlation, right? And if the work is just literally, work or a job or something like that, I don't think that we could use, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I don't think that we could use the metaphor of working for a corporation, for example, and what that means, that drive to keep things separated from working with family and working on our own home. And it's really, it's a non-parallel universe. Sleep, get some rest, get a massage, and then get busy.
Fair enough. Somebody wants to know your view around the role of power in your projects. So often designers are in the positions of power to make an impact, but in saying yes to everything, it seems like you're actually ceding a lot of that power to the communities you work with. How do you personally grow comfortable with that loss of control? And how, as an organization, do you assess when a partner has earned this trust?
I have no power. Time and time again, I could tell you by the number of times I've had guns put to my head by police. I have no power. And I'm going to acknowledge that right away. I have absolutely no power whatsoever. We have a lot of power. The power has always belonged to the community. And it's always been the collective. The impact that's sustainable is the collective impact. It's rarely the individual impact. I have autonomy, but I don't think that I have, much by way of power. So I don't think that I'm ceding anything by being faithful to my community.
Got it. How do you create sustainable partnerships with all of these organizations and communities? Do you follow up and check in with them when you're at capacity?
No. Nope. I show up and I do. That's literally all it is. There's just no magic formula to it. You show up and you do. You hear about a thing that's going on and you go like, oh, that sounds cool. And it sounds like that's something that I either want to know more about, or I might be able to contribute to something here, or these folks are making a really specific ask, and organizers we've gotten really good at making specific asks. We've gotten good at saying like, hey, pop on over to the church and help us stuff some backpacks. That's what we need right now. Mm-hmm. right? And, and folks show up and you stuff backpacks and you eat empanadas and, and you learn stupid jokes, or someone will teach you, inappropriate things in languages that you didn't know before, so it's all just hanging out, you show up and you hang out more and more and more. Some of the best organizing work that I've seen happen has been around knitting groups. People just show up and they're doing their knitting thing. And next thing you know, someone has the idea of like, hey, why don't we knit for this specific idea or intervention? And, or let's create this product that we can then sell. You're not going to make a lot of money off of it, but you're going to engage. And that process of continually engaging eventually leads you to that place where it's productive cooperation because the machine is moving so smoothly. There's a grant that we have out right now. I'm hoping it comes through. It probably will. We're going to be deploying these tricked out containers, shipping containers, in some of the key neighborhoods, and they're going to be called Fire, just really nicely designed thing, all glass front, right? And they're community pottery stations. The Hartford is built on a bed of clay, and that clay is actually you could sculpt with it and you can fire it. A friend of mine has developed a process where you could just dig a hole in the earth, start a fire, lay these pieces in, and you could fire it that simply without a kiln. And it's perfect, beautiful, sparkly black pottery. And we're going to create spaces where the community can come in, solar powered, and work with this free clay. Land, a form of resource that belongs to all of us, right? Make pottery or make things out of clay and be able to start cottage commerce with it, and be able to use it as gifting for folks who don't have the resources most of the time to give gifts, right? And to use it as a way of the community coming together around the shared activity. There's this incredible, I'm going to paraphrase it, right? Because I always butcher her, and she's a little more sarcastic than I am about it. Jenny Holzer, the installation artist, had a plaque that I'd seen once, and I'm going to paraphrase it because it's more meaningful to me. And it's that go to where the people are hungry, feed them, and organize them, right? So if we take a look at that as really the basic process, that's all we've been doing all along, right? We show up where people need something, they need support, they're hungry for something, and I'm wide open about what you could be hungry for, right? And we do the work of feeding together. And through that, we organize, and the more we organize, the more we collect power.
So one last question, because I know we're running a little bit long. I was struck by, what you mentioned earlier in your presentation, that it took you 30 years. And when it really struck you around really to learn this around civil rights and racial inequality. And the other day when you and I talked, what my real takeaway, I actually talked to my husband about it, is you recalling overhearing a conversation your 10-year-old son Sawyer was having with a teacher. It was during class during a Zoom call, which is a really interesting line of sight that most parents didn't have before we're currently in this situation. And you talked about how they were tackling tough subjects, like everything that's going on right now, at a 10-year-old level. Knowing that, and knowing that that is what the next generation is being either built, been given the skills to do that, or they're learning it by a little bit of baptism by fire. What can this generation of these DFAers on the call here and the designers, what guidance can you give to them, you know, early in their careers to embrace and do whatever they can to change that solid, straight, horizontal line?
Yeah. So the work on the solid, straight, horizontal line is power. I saw this amazing diagram about grieving, and it was about the circles of grieving, right? And it was how to be truly, how to have real empathy around grieving, and it's you grieve outward, you don't grieve in, right? Meaning that the person who's suffering the greatest loss, we work to lift their burden. We don't put on them that burden, right? So it's this constant taking the grieving from the center and moving it out through these circles of impact of that grief, right? I think the same is true for all of these social issues, right? We take a look at the folks who are most burdened by it, and we move the grieving, we move the oppression, we move the inequity, we move everything outwards from them, right? So if you want to break that cycle, figure out where you are, you know, so I'm going to use the grieving metaphor again, right? Figure out where you are in that chain of grieving. You know, are you the person who just lost their kid, you know, or are you, you know, the uncle of the person who just lost their kid? Are you the neighbor of the uncle? You know, so you figure out where you are in that chain of grieving, and you look behind you and help lift the grief from whoever that other person is, right? Same is true around, because there's trauma embedded in all this stuff, right? The same is true around racial equity. The same is true around, you know, this awful, you know, patriarchy and misogyny that, you know, that we're living under. Same is true around issues around trans rights. Keep lifting outward, and we will break that chain. That's what we're seeing starting to happen right now in this condition that we're in, where we're less distracted, right? You know, where we don't have the play that we could run off to, or the ball game that we can run off to, you know, that helps us take our eyes off of the weightiness of what we're experiencing. And I'm watching really tremendously strong and caring and loving people reach back and lift the burden forward, you know, and that's where we're at. And I have to tell you, my 10-year-old is doing that. I was working on a project. Oh man, I wish I had shared this video with you because it'll make you all sob. You know what? I'll find the link and post it somewhere.
Yes.
Do you have access for everybody? Alden, you could share like a link with them?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can share it in the blog, yep.
But essentially, my kid lives in this ridiculously comfortable place. You know, when I first came to this country, we were 12 people living in a tenement in Brooklyn. And I take a look at what my children live in right now, and it's just bonkers, you know? And he's cognizant of that. And what I learned about we were working on some work around homelessness, and to stop family homelessness, to stop it, right? You know, it takes $1,000 per family. That's it. $1,000 per family. There's 1,000 families in Connecticut that are at risk of being homeless. You know, so, you know, it's 1,000 times 1,000. What's that? $1 million? Am I doing good math today? It's not a tremendous amount to stop family homelessness on a year to year. And that's not about necessarily putting money in people's pockets, but that's about doing early interventions to recognize before you get evicted that you're at that place, and provide some of the services and supports and, you know, and what's necessary to disrupt that cycle. Because what we know is that a kid that was in a homeless family has like an astronomically higher likelihood of being homeless as an adult. right? You know, because that cycle wants to pull him right into it. So this kid learned this information, and we made this little video about him walking around, sharing his home and why it matters to him. You know, and you know, and he exposed every bit of what he knows is his privilege, you know, and delivered it with this message of like, here's what we could do. We can make it so that more people, you know, don't, you know, can have that feeling of home that I have. This kid delivered this message. I mean, he was like 7.5, 8 at the time, right? And he raised so much money for this organization that was working in this space, you know, because he believed this wholeheartedly. He didn't trip over the language. He didn't, you know, it wasn't like a complicated thing where it's like, well, okay, so I deal with this all the time right now, right? I've got an issue with this concept of excellence. It's a whole other conversation that we could have, right? You know, it's like so, like, it's so about the system of oppression, right? About who owns that idea. And, you know, and folks in my generation continually trip over it. They just tell me what words to use, you know, is the plea that I keep getting, but that's not really what's at the heart of it, right? You've got to embody the thing. You can't just be handed a script for empathy. You have to live empathy, right? He doesn't need a script for empathy. He lives empathy. And that is what I'm seeing in this generation. You know, that's what I'm seeing in young folks right now. You know, they've grown up in a way that's made them, you know, design machines. You know, they're all empathy leaders. You know, and so to me, if I had any advice on breaking the cycle, if you're here on this call right now, you're here because you're an empathy leader. You know, you knew that you were coming to a call that was going to tell you how to use Photoshop better. You know, that wasn't in the title description, but you showed up for this conversation. Honor that about yourselves, you know, grow that, bring that forward, you know, you'll break the cycle.
That's awesome. What a great way to end the call. Thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you to you, Rich Hollant. That was amazing. I could listen to you just tell all of your stories all day long, and definitely share that video because I do love videos that make people cry, and in a nice way, if you know what I mean. And also thank you so much to DFA for allowing me to MC this. I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot of things. And I definitely, I think everyone will take a lot away from this conversation and start action today within the daylight.
Awesome.
Thank you again so much.
And thanks, DFA. Danielle, thank you. You've been just so gracious throughout this whole process. I really appreciate it. And you too, Alden, thank you so very much. You know, just so everybody here knows, it's like there's these conversations that have before we have these conversations, you know, that are just so enriching and just, you know, so full of connectedness and sincerity, that it's just such a blessing to do this. And, you know, and thank you all. I mean, I'm just looking at so many smiling faces here and it's touching.
I know, highlight of the week. I don't know what else I'm going to do better than this. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to jump.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.